Do I need to press a button or anything? I've touched some tech. It was always going to go wrong. One, two. We're in. Right, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming on this very wet and I guess now wintry evening. Good to see lots of familiar faces from previous sessions, and welcome to all of those for whom this is your first Building Sustainable Communities event. I'm going to do the thank yous first. So this event doesn't happen without the support from our trusted suppliers, and in addition today, some of the local organisations who kind of exist to support retrofit across Somerset. So massive thank you to all of those shown on the slide, and I'll talk a little bit more about Extra Therm, our headline sponsor for this evening, in a minute. So the focus for this event, energy efficiency and home energy efficiency. No one, I guess, across the UK and much wider kind of missed the cost of living, energy prices increasing, and the kind of very current challenges around energy efficiency. But I think there's a really important point to make here, in that whilst we're all looking at the current, oh my word, my electricity bills and my gas bills have gone up, actually the solutions to that are really no different to the solutions to the longer term, trying to meet the government's commitment to net zero in 2050, to resolve climate change and make our homes all more efficient in the long term. So when we talk about home energy efficiency, it's very pertinent that we're talking about it while we're all facing these increased bills, and the community in which we operate are looking at that pain, but we're also trying to solve that longer term problem. It'd be remiss of me, I'm only going to stand up for a couple of minutes before I hand over to the main acts for the evening, but it'd be remiss of me not to just very briefly talk about Bradford's, why we're standing up here, what we see our role in home energy efficiency and building more sustainably. And I break it down into 4 simple points for you this evening. So at Bradford's, our role really, as I say, in these 4 points. One is making sure that we've got the knowledge of and the provision of the solutions that help people to build more sustainably. Our second is making sure that we are in tune with the upcoming regulations, policy, and the drivers that are making this happen, so that we're informed to know which solutions we probably want to be looking at. The third is our responsibility to educate and inform our communities, our wider family. And when I talk about that, I mean internally making sure that all of our team understand this and know how to help our communities, but further out than that, helping our customers and the wider community, and hence doing events like this evening. And then finally, support the skills development. There's a lot talked around at the moment around skills development. So to support the skills development, both of our current trades, but also of the future trades, and again of our employees, but the future trades, working with local colleges and making sure that actually what's coming out of there is fit to build sustainably in the future. How are we doing that? Working closely with our suppliers. We make no bones about the fact that Bradford's is a breaker of bulk. We are jack of all, and actually the masters are our suppliers, the experts, the guys with the deep technical expertise as to how to apply and use the materials and products that they do are the ones that we need to refer to get that expert advice. Focusing on the training of our teams, that's absolutely critical, and I'm really grateful to Derek earlier for giving us some insight around Extratherm, around new products, how to use them, how to make the most of using them. And events like this, backed up as we develop it by content and comms that gives an enduring, as opposed to this hour-long presentation, ability for people to access the information they need to know what to do. So events like this. Tonight, I'm just going to run through very quickly what you're going to see over the next hour. The goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. And I'm hoping I've brought together some presenters tonight who are going to do exactly that. No pressure, guys. But really, presentations from the experts. Talking very much around retrofit. So we've got Phil Mason from Trustmark, who's going to talk to us about retrofit very much from the kind of national perspective. And then we're very fortunate to have James Mullen here from the Centre for Sustainable Energy up in Bristol, who are delivering retrofit in a practical way. And then we're going to move on. Very grateful to have Ben James here, who's one of our customers up in Ledbury, architect and designer, to talk about incorporating sustainability into design. But before we do that, as I said, Extratherm, very kindly headline sponsor this evening. Super grateful for that, and we have a really close relationship with Extratherm, which works very well, and I think there's a really good relationship there. So thank you for that. I'm going to bring up Martin Randall in a minute, who is the spec manager in this area for us. Martin, over to you to give a little introduction to Extratherm and where you guys are headed.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Charles. So my name's Martin Randall. I'm one of the specification managers for Extratherm. There is 4 of us that cover the UK, and we are backed up by our sales team, 2 of which are here with us today. So I'm just going to show you a quick video on what we're doing from a sustainability point of view in the background. So I'm just going to play you that video right now.
Future generations are relying on us to act now in the climate emergency. That is why we are changing Extratherm from the roots up. We are focused on 2 simple questions. Are we leaving the world in a better state for our children than we found it? If not, what are we doing about it? As part of the Unilin Group 1 home policy, every aspect of our business is now operating with a sustainability first mindset. Meeting these environmental challenges is no easy feat, but we are working hard with our partners to improve the sustainability of construction. We are committed to becoming a zero carbon operation by 2030. sustainability pillars are founded on product, place, people, and partnership. Our products are also changing. The Eco 360 strategy is our commitment to continually review and improve the sustainable credentials of our products to meet the REBA Climate Challenge 2030. Join us on a journey where we can all learn, improve, and change.
So again, that's just a few things that we're doing in the background. A lot of those targets that we have, we're ahead of, and they are programmed in as part of a sustainability program. And part of sustainability, we have to do these things as a gradual approach. We have to plan them in, and we have to implement them and actually make sure they happen. So one of the big things that we're talking about today, and we've got upstairs, is our new Eco 360 product. For us, we are the first manufacturer of PIR in Europe to use a bioenhancement. So that bioenhancement is rapeseed resin that we're using. And again, it's one of those things, we can do so much now. So we've got millions and millions of pounds worth of machinery across our 4 production facilities in the UK and Ireland. We can't just change all of that. It's not sustainable just to put new machinery in that would take more rapeseed oil or rapeseed resin. So it is a gradual approach. I liken it when I talk to people, a bit like Worcester did with the trials of hydrogen, where they did the mixes with that and natural gas. Again, that's what they're capable of doing at the moment. So that's what we're capable of doing now, and we will continue to improve on that and drive further. So with the Eco 360, we have it in our ranges of full fill, partial fill, and general purpose boards. It is bioenhanced. We designed it specifically around the REBA Climate Challenge and LETI Climate Challenge. It has an improved thermal performance of 0.020. We've reduced the packaging, which is fairly important. We've reduced the packaging by over 50%. And that packaging is also biodegradable, but things are only biodegradable when they're put in the right place at the right time and stuff. So again, we have to consider all of these things. I was at REBA's headquarters earlier today doing another presentation in London, and people started talking to me about plant-based packaging, which is a fantastic idea. We would implore that. It would be absolutely great. We could do it. But we have to think of health and safety aspects. So there's other things that come into it. What happens to plant-based material when it gets wet? It deteriorates, it falls to pieces. So have we got a health and safety problem, specifically in the merchant's yard when it gets delivered to site? So again, we have to think about other factors. We also claim it has less waste. The reason that we claim it has less waste is because we'll get involved in material takeoffs. We'll start looking at specific designs around DPCs, lintels. How can we reduce that wastage? So at the moment, we have a wastage of about 10%, I think, is a general average for an external wall. We want to see that going down to 5%. Again, less waste on site, better from a sustainable point of view, and better for you guys commercially. So we talk a lot about operational carbon, probably a lot less about embodied carbon. I would say there's probably less people that probably understand that in here than they do operationally, because we talk about operational carbon all the time. So again, that's measured under the building regulations, Part L, Volume 1, for SAP compliance. So we talked about SAP compliance in our installation masterclass earlier today. So we've been used to that, and we're used to that for the reduction of CO2, which we have a 31% reduction now with the new Part L, and we're looking to reduce that to 75 to 80% in 2025. But embodied carbon, so again, we don't look at this. We are going to start looking at it. We talked about Part Z earlier, but again, it's looking at the energy that's used to extract, transport the raw material, as well as the in-use stage, as well as the demolition and disposal stage. We have to start thinking of all these things to truly start looking at sustainability. So whilst it's not currently measured in the building regulations, it is clear that it's going to become Part Z. So that will happen. If people want to know timescales, I'll just say Conservative government. So best guess, probably 5 to 8 years, I would say, before we see it as an actual regulation. Somebody disagrees with me there. Do you think? Look, true. I would not disagree, but when again, we can have a far more detailed discussion afterwards, but when we start looking at how it's regulated and stuff like that, it's going to take a long time to align us all. So, for instance, we as an insulation industry look at 100 mil as a standard for running an EPD. So when we look at the environmental product declarations, 100 mil is the standard, but we've got people that do outside of that because it's the optimum thickness for them and their factory. So until that becomes regulated, we can't stop that greenwashing that happens. So, which does bring me to the EPDs. So again, these are the sum impacts of all the GWP through the lifetime, so they're based on 100 years. You've got various stages from A1 to A3, which looks at a product stage, A1 to A5, the construction stage. You've got B1 to B7, which is the use stage, and C1 to C4, the end of life stage. And then you go beyond. You go beyond and then into the reuse stage. Can it be recycled? Can it be used into another product? Is it a true cradle-to-cradle certified product? Can it be used in the exact same form again and again? So how are we going to do all of this? Again, you might recognize one of the guys there. There's two other people in the front row with us as well. And it's not just about us. It's collaboration and teamwork. From a charity perspective, other stuff that I'm involved in, we don't mind dealing with other charities. But from a contractor point of view, from a merchant point of view, some people have the perception that we can't work together. And that's something that we've got to overcome. Another thing I wanted to do is we talk a lot about carbon footprint. And we talk a lot of it from a company perspective, but I'm a fairly interactive, not that entertaining person, as you probably can see. But who here, other than Giles, knows their own personal carbon footprint? So we've got 3 hands, 4 hands, out of a room of how many people? So how are we going to deal with climate change? Who has to deal with it? Because it's us. We have to know and understand. So I spoke to Giles about it. Giles did his through the WWF. There's the tree planting app. You can do it. It's not massively accurate because if you had to spend that much time looking at it, you wouldn't bother doing it. Plus, you'd have to ask your wife where all this information is. Where are the energy bills kept? You know, what are they? So again, it's about a 3-minute exercise. So I'd implore everyone to have a look. The WWF is okay. Have a look, see where you are, see if you're below the UK average, see if you're above it, see if there's a simple way of making that change. Because without us all doing it, we're not going to change anything. So don't just think it's Bradford's, Extratherm, Knauf, Rockwall, and all these other good people that are here as manufacturers that are going to do it, because we're not. We have to do this together. A very important message to end with. We are changing our name from the 1st of January. So we've been owned by a company called Unilin since 2016. So there's nothing more to it than 2 brands fighting against each other. We thought Extratherm, and always have done, is a massive and fantastic brand in the UK. Unilin have their own thoughts. 8,000 employees. They're looking to have €1 million turnover insulation business. You can imagine how the conversation went. So again, on the 1st of January, we'll be known as Unilin. Our products aren't changing. The references that we have for our products will remain the same. So again, that's me. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over now to Phil at Trustmark.
Thank you. Have you got the clicker as well? Oh, it's on there. Good evening. Hang on me. I've got 3 things to hold here. This could go horribly wrong, couldn't it? Yes, good evening. I'm Phil Mason I work for Trustmark. My function is the head of regulatory engagement, so I spend quite a lot of time talking to our government department bays and managing our relationship and answering questions. We all do it as a team, but that's sort of part of my key function. And I like talking to people, so I'll try and keep it to my 15, 20 minutes or so, because I think that's important before I send anybody off to a certain sort of place of sleep. So I wasn't planning any audience participation, but after just seeing a bit, it's really difficult to resist the temptation. So aside from the fact that it says it there, and there's been an introduction, have some of you in the room heard of Trustmark before? Yeah, what about this side? And what about the back? Okay, good. So that's reasonable. Now, the other thing I'd just like to ask you is, who are you all? What do you represent? What sectors do we represent? So we're all in construction in some form or another, I'm guessing. Are you builders? Are you installers? Are you architects? Are you specifiers? Environmentalists. So we can use that for us all, probably, can't we? Because we're all environmentalists under our interest here this evening. So bear with me. I'm between glasses. So what is Trustmark? That's exactly what we are. We are the only government-endorsed quality scheme for trades in and around the home. We've been around since 2005. I won't bore you with our history, but it's in the last few years you've really become, or those of you that are, have become familiar with us, because we're regulated into the energy company obligation, and we're brought in under some of the government-funded schemes, public-funded schemes, so that there's an oversight of what happens. But that isn't, I'm not really here to talk about Trustmark. I'm here to sort of kind of talk generally about retrofit. Are we all it's a funny question, isn't it, really? Because I'm undecided on my answer, really. Are we all really confident what retrofit means? Yeah, a bit of a long explanation is, so retrofit, it's something that we've coined in the industry, but I think our concern as Trustmark is I think I've got a slide with some numbers on. It's been a while ago since we put them together, but we've got about 24.5 million homes in the UK to retrofit over the next 28 years. It was 27 years almost now, isn't it? And I think the concern is that we've got to get the engagement of the general public. It's a massive challenge, and yet it's such a huge opportunity. So I'm going to talk fairly simplistically about retrofit, because I think it creates an opportunity for us to think about it and how we communicate the message to people that aren't familiar with the term. So we've got a little diagram, haven't we? We've got a standard property, standard energy consumption, energy loss through fabric, and carbon fuel heating source. That is your typical sort of, relatively typical UK home. I mean, I know there's a lot beyond that standard description. We want reduced energy consumption. I don't think the nation's interest has been more focused on that than it is now, because it's hitting us all in the pocket. Whole house, we need to consider the whole house. We start with fabric first approach, renewables, low carbon technologies. We want to lower our carbon footprint, just to follow on what you said. There's another element of it, and I don't think it's widely promoted. It's about asset increase as well, because currently I think we think an enormous amount about the aesthetics of a dwelling, and I know the public does, and I know that most of the people that I know about think about, what does it actually look like? Does that add the value? What does the garden look like? How recently was it landscaped? How new is the kitchen? But as we go forward, asset value will be driven the right way by increased asset value, by how far it is on its carbon journey, and the cost of running the dwelling. So what is retrofit? Well, it's everything there. I think that's and there's a lot of subsets of all of it as well. And one thing that I think we need to think about in order is, not only is it about insulation and it's about air tightness, but we have to ventilate these dwellings as well. What we're doing is putting an overcoat on something, and if we continue to put overcoats on things without thinking too much about how the dwelling works, we're going to drive up condensation, black mold, and all those things that have been in the headlines over the last couple of weeks or so, because of a very sad incident that's been apportioned directly back to poor indoor air quality and black mold. So we're making things airtight, but we need measured ventilation through them as well. And then we think about all those other areas that are in there. And we've also got to think about cooling as well, because we've got buildings that overheat and we're using energy to keep them cool. So I think that's a pretty constructed, well-balanced list. I mean, even if I do say so myself. So why retrofit? So I don't think there's any one answer, really, because it depends on what the client wants and what their drivers are. And depending on demographics of where that customer or client is positioned, they'll do it for other reasons. It's obvious, I think, currently, to most of us, we want to reduce energy cost. We want to reduce energy use, which links to reduced energy cost. Then there's carbon emissions. Now, there are some people that probably have very little interest in reducing carbon emissions. They're interested in how it hits their pocket. But there are people that the other way around as well. They're thinking, well, I'm fortunate. I don't mean me as an individual. I'm talking generally. That I think there's people that can say, I am fortunate enough as an individual. The cost is immaterial. I want to do the right thing for the planet. Then we must think about internal comfort, and we must think about internal air quality. And the value of properties would look like it's starting to be measured to a certain degree on what the EPC rating looks like, because people are understanding that there is a potential now over the next 28, 27 years that I'm going to have to invest in the dwelling. So the better the condition when I take it over as a purchase, the easier that's going to be for me, because it's started its journey, and also it costs less to operate. What I might be able to do. So now this is an interesting point, because I'm thinking many of you in the room will be able to answer that question very well. But I think customers, the general public, they don't know where to start. We've had some of the public come through earlier this afternoon, and we start to talk to them in all our different ways of everybody that was upstairs. And there are some people, and a lot that we engage with as Trust when we go out and speak to the more general public rather than the trades, that absolutely don't know where to start, which order to do, what products to use, who to engage to do it. And these are the things that we've got to try and crack collectively, I think, because it's all of us that have this responsibility, I think. The government recently transferred something that was called Simple Energy Advice onto the government website. And I include the link in there because I think if you've got customers that want to go to, I know there's been a bit of upheaval in the government over the last sort of few months, in case anybody may not have noticed, that necessarily link back to government is, it depending where you sit, and it's not a political statement, but I think it's about going back to trust. There are more sources than just this, but single trusted sources, so people can actually get some advice and get a simple understanding that is consistent and isn't changing, and it's not driven by commercialism. It's just driven by advice. So that's something to bring your attention to, really. And I think it's something that it's an evolving service, I think it's fair to say, but I think that's something where the public need to be aware of. So here's our figures. Look. 24 million UK homes, depending who you speak to. Now, that looks like a lot of work to me. And if any of you have seen or spoken to me individually or seen me present anything like this before, I flatter myself. But if you have, you'll see me focus on that bottom line. 2,450 homes per day, 7 days a week, for really what is the next 27 years. Now, that's a lot of work. That's a marvellous opportunity. But we have the wider public than us in the room collectively that may not understand what their role is and what their commitment might need to be. And other than the financial element of it, currently out into what we call the able-to-pay market, I'm not quite sure what the drivers might be in the educational processes for people to understand and start to engage. I don't think that's fully complete yet. I won't read those numbers out. You can do your maths for yourself. But that's the sort of the broad range of dwellings and the improvements that need to be made from G to this upper A end that most of you will understand in probably way more detail than I, that we've got to drive. So it's the challenge is enormous. And I think collectively we're some of the people in the room that will help deliver that. So where Trustmark fits in, Trustmark is mandated in some areas, as I say. In the wider world, it's optional for a member of the public, a consumer, to use a Trustmark registered individual or business. That isn't mandated. That isn't to say that anybody outside Trustmark isn't performing their function adequately, if not considerably better than adequately. But it's about when the public are looking to engage tradespeople that they may not know across the sectors, we've got a facility to do it. And this is by which we do it. We vet people. We work through scheme providers, so our scheme providers should do that, I should say, rather than us. We deliver a compliance and audit function at the back of it. So we do look at work. We do have some fairly challenging conversations. We look at work that's lodged with us, and we go out and have a look. And we do find a broad range of work quality, some really, really good work that it would be impossible to improve on. People in the centre of that are delivering exactly what's expected of them, then people at the lower end of it, or organisations at the lower end of it that leave a little bit to be desired. And we work very closely with those organisations to help find the root cause and encourage them and build the relationships through. And that started to work quite nicely over the last few years. Now, this is something just to dwell on for a little bit. Retrofitting a home, what we've got to be really careful about is the process. Because what we want to do is fit the right measure into the right home and in the right order, because there is some fairly substantial potential to put the wrong measure into the wrong home, so that's not a double negative, and possibly in the wrong order, that measures go in that invalidate guarantees on other energy efficiency measures have gone on. They might have to be removed to be refitted, and that just builds cost into the process. So one of the things I would just ask how many of you in the room are aware of something called PAS 2035? Pop your hand up. Some of you. So PAS 2035 was something that's been, it's a process that really follows that route about assessing the property, about determining what needs to be done, getting appropriate designs for that work, and then carrying out to quality standard. And currently, as I said, I think I probably said a couple of times, PAS 2035 is drawn into the funded schemes requirements and under the energy company obligation. But the general public out there, and some of us in the construction industry, without any embarrassment to be added to that, or attached to that whatsoever, don't understand PAS 2035, don't know what it is. So we've got to go through a transition, because I think without doubt there might be a requirement to simplify some, not reduce the standards, simplify the document so there's more engagement with it and the process. But we've got quite a challenge that we've got some parts of the industry that are delivering to PAS 2035 and others that aren't. And we've got to bridge that gap. And I'm not sure what the solution to that is quite at the moment, about driving that engagement up. Oh, this is interesting. Maybe not necessarily to all of you in the room, but we very recently worked with a health and safety executive to deliver a home improvement app. And it's about safety, but what it's about are the public understanding what the safety risks are when work's carried out in a dwelling, in order that they can ask the right questions, understand what their responsibilities are as well, in order that work can be managed safely. Because we started conversations with the HSE year or so ago, because they're very much aware of the fact that we've got a massive amount of work to do over the next few years, and it'll go into people's homes that have possibly never had any construction work done in their home in their reasonable memory. And it's just about driving that in a safe and sustainable way, and really to support the reputation of the industry, because we don't want bad press in our sector. It's not good for us. So this is something perhaps more that, if needs be, can be driven. Not sure how popular a slide like this might be if you're the professionals delivering the work and the able to pay. So I won't dwell on it for that very reason, but there is a lot of support available to the public as long as they meet the eligibility criteria via government through this investment of £12 billion. And my view might be that we've got a supply chain that is only just able to cover that. So there's much more opportunity than not only supporting the consumer, but supporting you as a supply chain in order to come into this, to start delivering this works. Because what we'd really like you to do is get a really good taste and a flavour for supporting the challenge, and so that you can see what's in it for you as well, through being able to increase your business plans, being able to make your deliveries more sustainable, invest in training, invest in your businesses and the people that work for you, because there is a lot of government available, money available, but also there are now, that is starting to drive interest into able to pay sectors where they may know people in their family, or they might have friends or relations, relations would be in your family, wouldn't they, that you can, that they're starting to get an understanding of what's available and how it works, and good news travels quite quickly. Okay, if you want to learn more about Trustmark, Harriet and I are here for a little while after this sort of talk session ends, so we can answer some questions. But otherwise, have a look at our website and talk to us. We're available on the telephone. We've got a support department if you want to ask questions, or you want questions answered about how you might participate, or some more general questions. And that's me. So with that, thank you for listening. James, I know you're there. I know you a little bit virtually, don't I, James? But we've not met in person, so yeah. So I'm going to hand over to you now, James. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And,
good to meet you in person.
okay, good evening. Hopefully I'll be able to follow on from that and it'll make some sense. There may be a bit of repetition, but hopefully not too much. So I'm here to talk about Future Proof, which is a project based out of the Centre for Sustainable Energy in Bristol, which is about helping homeowners and tradespeople kind of get more involved with retrofit and access better services around it. So it was set up back in 2019. It was a BEIS funded pilot project. It was one of 6, actually, across the UK that ran for 2.5 years, hoping to both improve access for householders to information and expertise about retrofit, but also to the trade, and to improve training around retrofit. So for that time, we could actually offer free services, both to builders and to homeowners. And we're actually able to offer free advice, sort of generally over the phone, because I started this work during the pandemic, unfortunately. And the Green Register, who were offering training to contractors beforehand, were able to actually offer in-person training where they were paying contractors to come, because, you know, in this sector, people were self-employed, they would have to take time off work or in their own time to go to this training. So there was actually funding available to pay people to attend these sessions, which was really good. And we're just aiming at the able-to-pay market, as Phil said. And he mentioned PAS 25. I won't really touch on it too much, again, just because, as he said, it's generally not applicable at the moment to the able-to-pay market. So unfortunately, the free funding for this project ended in March last year, but there was so much demand for it, and it was clear that we needed to kind of develop a way of making it self-funding. So there was plenty of demand, and we then developed a suite of services which people could pay for. So it started out with a free, an introductory retrofit guide, which was quite high-level, generic advice. Homeowners would have a quick conversation with one of our advisors, and then we would kind of chop and change a report to suit their property, give them some additional advice about how to move forward with their project. But the heart of our service really at this stage is a full survey and retrofit plan. So one of our surveyors will come, spend a few hours at your property, develop a model, and then produce a plan for you to move forward with your retrofit. And there's also some other services which we can offer, like planning advice, project management, which we're hoping to move more into, kind of hand-holding through a project, helping people find contractors, reviewing quotes, that sort of thing. We can visit sites to do toolbox talks, chat to contractors if they need a bit more expertise around certain detailing issues with retrofit, if they're not that familiar. That's something else we can do. And then also just pass on information about contractors if people need help with who's going to do the actual work. So again, as Phil mentioned, the whole house approach is crucial. It's central to what we try and do. Fabric first really needs to be done. The whole point is reducing that space heat demand in your property before you then think about new heating systems or renewables. So it's really important to emphasize that. And that also includes remedial measures and maintenance as well, because if you have a damp wall, there's no point thinking about putting any insulation on before that gets addressed. So that's an important aspect of fabric first. And again, another mention of ventilation. Another maxim in retrofit is no insulation without ventilation. It's already been said, but we don't want to continue sealing up our properties without having the right ventilation in the right place. And all of this is about avoiding risk. Again, as mentioned, there's been some horrific failures in the past where single measure schemes have ended in failure. Been some horrific examples like in Preston with EWI, that sort of thing. And this is ultimately what led to PAS 2035. Joined up thinking, being holistic about the building, making sure that things are in the right place at the right time and work as they should. So yeah, repeating Phil, the sequence of measures is really important. You don't want to put external wall insulation on and then a few years down the line think that you want to change the windows. You end up breaking all that out, ruining the detailing. So plan the whole house at once and make sure that those measures are, the interactions and junctions between the measures are really, really important. That's generally where modelled or planned performance will not be achieved if people aren't thinking about how these different elements and measures are actually joining up. And lastly, we need to step back from the house itself and just look at the context of the significance of the property. Most obviously with listed and heritage buildings, conservation areas, but even in cities, you know, you've got a terrace of similar properties is it sensible for one of those buildings to put EWI on? You know, you're going to affect the street scene. So you've got to think the whole house and the context, its significance. So as I said, the survey and retrofit plan, which is at the heart of what we offer, it's based on some software called Home Retrofit Planner, which has been developed by Carbon Co-op up in Manchester. It's a SAP-based tool, but with additional functionality to make it more bespoke to the property. After we've created a baseline model of how it is now, we'll then model a series of scenarios where we can add measures, model savings, cost, and that sort of thing. Typically, it would be a pathway to a kind of whole house retrofit. So you do your quick wins first, and then potentially more expensive, more invasive measures, usually to a third or fourth scenario where we feel that it's now ready for a heat pump and some PV, typically. Sometimes it might be there's a range of options depending on budget or level of disruption that you're willing to live with. But usually it's a pathway. And then we add, obviously, property-specific commentary. There's lots of generic information in the report about all of the measures we suggest, but we need to tailor that to the property. There may be quirks and, you know, making it fit. You might have specific thermal bridges that we need to discuss, so we'll always tailor the report to suit your property. And then we'll go on to give advice about contractors that we could recommend, certain materials, systems, that sort of thing. So there's some follow-up assistance too. So since we started charging for these and offering it as a paid-for service, we've done over 150 in the last year, generally focused around Bristol, but we're spreading our tentacles further and further afield. I was over in Salisbury a few weeks ago, done quite a few down here in Taunton too. The full kind of starting price for a 3-bed house is £550, but more often than not, people have paid quite a lot less than that because there's been different pots of funding around which have helped us subsidise that for the homeowner. Now that's kind of region specific, so they're available in different regions at different times. There's not so much left at the minute nationwide, region-wide, but there's some funding in Bruton which has brought the cost down to £10 for a survey. And we're hoping that in the next year there'll be more funding across the region to make these more affordable. So some key issues that have come out of this, and typically issues with retrofit in general, but it's become even more apparent since we've been doing these surveys. It's really important just to understand your home's moisture balance and its construction type. Specifically when you get into traditional buildings, it's really important to know what materials were used in that building, because that will determine what materials you should use for retrofit. So is it lime mortar, lime plaster? Do you need to maintain that breathability across the construction? And following on from that, a key issue is where can I get those materials? In your mainstream chain builders merchants, you'll struggle to get fat lime plaster, wood fibre, sheep's wool, these sorts of materials which you need to use if you're going to work on traditional properties. And another point following on from that is, okay, I've got the materials, who can use these materials? Who's going to put them on for me? So there's a real shortage of people and access to those skills to use these materials which are appropriate to all of the traditional buildings out there. Most common question we probably get is, can I have a heat pump? You know, it's obviously not black and white. It's a very dynamic area with technology changing, fuel costs changing, so there's many variables. We'll typically try and get people to reduce their demand as far as possible to give them the best chance possible of having a heat pump that works effectively. And just the supply chain and everyone involved in general, that's why this project kind of came into being, and it's what Trustmark are doing. There's just a lack of connection between people offering the advice, the surveys, the suppliers, the traders. All of this needs to improve so people have a better experience of their retrofit journey, finding out what they need to do and having that work done. And lastly, funding, always an issue. Always need more. Unfortunately, apart from the boiler upgrade scheme, there's nothing for the able to pay market at the minute, nothing for insulation. The Green Homes grant obviously crashed and burned, so We hope that there's something like that in the future, but it will then require the PAS certification. So while it's a good thing if there's funding and it's following this rigorous kind of technical standard, it does make it harder in a way for a lot of the smaller contractors because they have to get certification. So, but it will happen. So something quickly on the Green Register. I'm sure many of you are aware of them already. They were our partner when we developed Future Proof. They were offering free contractor training through the pilot phase. They've been doing this for over 20 years. And through that training with a lot of the local contractors based in and around Bristol, we developed a list of future-proof associated builders who we can pass on to people who come to us for advice. So linking the homeowners with the right contractors. But again, unfortunately, because the funding finished, they had to find a way to keep that going with their own funding. So they developed the Future Proof Essentials training course, which is 10 one-hour sessions, industry experts, suitable for contractors, tradespeople, architects, etc. The full cost at the minute is basically £300 for this course, but if one company puts through multiple people, it gets cheaper. At the minute, there was 33 places for this course in Somerset. I'm a little bit late to this now because apparently there's about 1 week left, and there are 6 free places as of today, apparently. So if you're quick, you might be able to get on this for free. If not, there's a 10% discount for everyone here today who's interested in pursuing this training, and it gives a really good, relatively brief but still detailed overview of retrofit. This is the landing page, just to show you the 10 sessions. So you've got introductions to sustainable building, building physics, PAS 2035. Peter Rickaby takes that session. Assessments, life cycle analysis of building materials, and then each of the different elements. So you've got external wall insulation there, but that does include roofs, and then internal wall insulation also includes windows and floors, and then ventilation, building services, and water use. So it's really good whole house look at retrofit and all of the factors involved. This is just one still from the course to give you a little taste. So this is from the internal wall insulation session, just to show a traditional wall, the moisture flows, moisture balance, and then just a hint towards the kind of materials that you want to use in this sort of construction. So onto a brief case study. This is a townhouse in Bristol, and EcoDC are the contractors who came on the early future-proof training sessions. So they were on our list of associate builders who we could pass on to a homeowner who came to us for advice about their retrofit. Their initial concern with the property and reason for undertaking a retrofit, you can see from a few pictures, they had really bad damp. It was a really cold, unpleasant house to be in, particularly along one side of an old extension. And these thermographic pictures just show that even more clearly. You can see the massive heat loss through an open chimney, around poorly fitted insulation and downlighters. So there's a lot of work to improve that. So what did they do? They upgraded the roof to surpass building regs, got it down to 0.11 U value with a combination of insulation between and below the rafters, as well as some mineral wool on the joists where that was present. They also strengthened it to take PV and improved wind tightness with a new vapor permeable membrane. They put EWI on the coldest section of the wall and IWI in some of the bedrooms, which also felt the cold a lot, and EWI wasn't appropriate because of the stonework. And they also replaced all the windows to meet 0.8 U value, which is pretty good for glazing. The initial plan had a new boiler, but they've since had an air source heat pump fitted, and they had a really thorough air tightness and thermal bridging strategy. So the chimneys were capped and filled with expanded clay aggregate. All of the downlighter hoods in the ceilings had the downlighters had airtight hoods fitted to them. New insulated and well-sealed loft hatches, sealed floorboards, and really well-fitted new doors and windows, so taped into the walls, really paying close attention to how they were installed. And that got them down to 4 air changes an hour, which is pretty good for a retrofit. They also went with a Air Eco demand-controlled ventilation system and a small PV system. So a few pictures. You can see mineral wool obviously on the right, and then just the attention to detail with the taping of the vapor control layer on the ceiling. On the bottom left of the left-hand picture, you can see the internal wall insulation going on there, some wood fibre and more taping. And then the picture on the right, just to show the detail, it's had a first parge coat put on the wood fibre. That then becomes the air tightness layer, which gets taped into the ceiling. So they've really gone to town on the air tightness. Some insulation being fitted from above before a new membrane gets taped on and new battens and the tiles replaced. So I'm sure this is, stating the obvious really, but difficulties they faced working on a site while the people are still living in the property, and this is quite common in retrofit. Obviously it saves people a lot of money. Material cost increases, obviously everyone's feeling that, and then that obviously impacts on what could potentially already be quite small margins getting even more squeezed. It's a lot harder going in for retrofit work when you don't know exactly what you're going to get. You're kind of peeling back the layers. It could be a can of worms. It's a lot easier to quote for a new build or an extension or a loft. So it is more challenging, but as we can see, there's a lot of opportunity there. This was some modelling done in PHPP, which shows that the space heating demand was reduced by over 2/3 with these measures, which had subsequent savings with heating emissions and fuel costs. Now, the emissions there are assuming it's a new gas boiler. So with a heat pump, it'll be a fraction of that, even further, so probably 1/10 of what it was before the retrofit. An energy bill, this was probably put together before the energy crisis as well. So the fuel cost savings are likely to be far higher than that too. It did cost 160 grand, so it was, it's not a cheap project, but it's given the homeowner a really warm, comfortable and cheap home to live in for hopefully a long time. So I'll just finish with their quote that they really thanked Futureproof for the initial contact and advice and support, and passing them on to the contractor who could undertake this work for them. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. I'll pass on to Ben for the next slide.
Thank you. Evening, guys. I'm Ben James, obviously. I'm here today to talk to you more so about new builds, and opposed to the retrofit discussions we've had tonight, is more looking at future thinking and starting from the very beginning to avoid the scenario where you're looking at adding things later on or making mistakes, and trying to realise quick fixes and simple tricks that might save you, with customers yourselves or you personally when you're looking at designing even extensions or a house yourself. So I'm an architectural designer and developer myself. I have an architecture practice which does new builds and renovations, extensions, all sorts of things. But we also do our own developments as well. And the benefit for myself is the things that I'm learning daily, I can implement myself and show to other customers and builders and suppliers what can work, and trying to change people's way of thinking. So just a quick few facts. I mean, these may have changed, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some quite shocking information which I think is really important for us to kind of consider. The main focus here is obviously the housing market, and the developments that we do have a massive impact on our carbon emissions, and that's why we really need to focus on making changes from the very beginning, so that when we reach the 2050 target, we haven't got houses that we've built for the last 30 years that weren't built correctly. My role as an architect obviously is very important. 42,000 architects roughly today. Each architect is responsible for approximately 5,900 tons of carbon dioxide in terms of the houses and designs that they're producing. So it's really important for myself and others to learn good design practice, new methods, new technologies, just good build practice really, so that when we are doing these designs and implementing new things, we're reducing that impact. So back to basics. This is going to be a really simple, quick run through of how my mind thinks. Obviously 9 years of architectural learning. You're going to be walking from this room an architect after 30 minutes. So what is a shelter? What is a home? The basic needs are that it wants to be dry, warm, generally between 20 and 27 degrees. Some of you like it a lot warmer, some of you like it at 18 degrees. Draft-free, no mold, healthy, adequate lighting, soundproofed and secure. That's the basics needs of a house. This next slide is really interesting actually. If you want to visit this carbon intensity website, it looks at information being fed from National Grid at the moment per region and what those regions are relying on in terms of their basic source of energy for offices, schools, homes. In particular here, the Southwest, really high intensity. And it's interesting to know that actually 70% of that is reliant on gas at the moment for their heating needs and energy needs. That's lighting as well, obviously. So we're all familiar with this standard design of a house, a box with a few windows and a door. Not one that I like to do very often. But looking at it in a basic way, these are the key focuses we need to look at in terms of where do we lose the most heat or energy, and how can we improve that through simple design techniques and tricks. So what is heat? It's transfer of energy, basically, and it's always looking to focus to go out of the colder part of the building. This is a really simple way of looking at how a change in design can affect your heat loss. So each of these shapes have the same floor area, but the surface area changes as you start to extrude and change the actual design itself. And looking at it in a very basic way, that can increase the heat loss quite significantly if you're not controlling it well. Different ways of heat gain and loss. I think we're all familiar with like the sun. Obviously, we love sunbathing. You get really hot, that's radiation. These are really important factors because these are how you can look at controlling your building through the three means of heat. And some of you may be familiar with this, but this is how we look down into detail at the makeup of the wall and the U values, and that's obviously where insulation comes in and things like that. It's looking at the basics, and looking at how we can change how we put a building together to improve it from the start. It's not always about heating, though, and obviously it's very popular in the news at the moment about energy bills, but also we've all noticed that the climate's changing. In the summer, buildings are getting very hot, and we're all looking at buying these retrofit aircon units, which cost a bomb, and we use them for 2 weeks, but it's because of poor design from the start. So we also need to focus on keeping cool. Simple ways of keeping cool. So keeping the sun out, obviously, blinds, orientation, ventilation, open the windows, vegetation and water, I'll show you those later. Thermal mass is obviously the build-up of the building, and obviously the others. Let's focus on Birmingham on this, so apologies for people in the southern region. As an architect, we need to look at the solar path. It's really important to a building because we can't just place a building on a site and expect it to work. It has to be designed around environment. And this really simple diagram looks at where does the sun cross, how can we use that to our advantage without using energy and artificial lighting, essentially, to boost what we want as basic humans. Again, it's a simple diagram looking at, we all know where the sun rises and the heights that it gets to, but this is really important in terms of, one, reducing reliance on lighting indoors, but also using that sunlight to gain energy during the day. This is a real simple diagram in terms of orientation. So again, developers are kind of notorious for trying to maximize sites, get as many houses as you can on that site, make as much money. Not necessarily the best thing, because where you face that building can have a really negative impact in terms of how the building's going to perform. And that's when we then fall into the risk of retrofit later on. So this diagram explains how, if you're south-facing, you can easily shade yourself from the angle of the sun. So you can essentially reduce the overheating of the building very easily because the sun's at a high angle. Whereas a building which is west-facing is really difficult to do that. During the afternoon and the evening time, solar shading isn't going to have any improvements at all. It might look nice, but actually it's just going to get beaten by the sun. And again, that's a risk of developers and builders and even individuals looking for a nice design. They can repeat a design on a site, for example, because that's what the planners wanted us to do, for example. But a repeated design might not work. You have to adapt a house per the environment. So this is essentially saying we're used to that simple diagram when we were kids and we draw a sun with all the rays going all different directions. They don't go all directions. We are miles away from the sun. The sun is direct. It comes in one angle, and that's how we can easily control it, is to our benefit. So this is the simple rule of thumb. Again, I was talking about these easy rules that we can remember just for improving designs. These are different ways you can do it. So a south-facing building is going to get overheated. These are simple techniques that actually improve the aesthetics. Some people like it. You can be really clever with it. As an architect, we'll love it because we can just do some crazy designs. It's just design the building from the start to know that you're going to perform well. And this is for the opposite. So if you're that west-facing building, you can add vegetation to the side of the building to shade it, to stop it from overheating because of the lower angle. And you can angle it, the brise soleil vertically placed there so that you can control it instead of having it more of a horizontal angle. And this is when I mentioned about vegetation and trees. So I think we forget about the importance of plantation around a house. It's really clever and it can be really cheap as well for people to use. And it looks good. People love gardens. People like to have that as an aesthetic. A tree can provide simple shade into a building at different angles, but also you need to be wary of the distance the tree is to the house. This simple diagram shows that although it might work in the summer for high-angled sun, in the winter when that tree might lose its leaves, it's not got no benefit, except for it depends where your building is orientated, essentially. If you're south-facing and west-facing, you need to consider what that tree is, how it can work, but it's a simple technique that you can add. There's loads of apps you can purchase as well to help you with this in your own home. One really good one is Sunseeker. It tells you specific times of the day where the sun is. Even using when you're in a room, you can see the solar path at different times of the year. So you can be really specific in terms of placing that brise soleil or that shading or whatever you need to control the building's temperature. And again, you can do it externally. This is quite useful as well to know that if you don't want to overshadow your garden, you can really control how the building's designed, but you'll adapt into the environment, not just designing a building thinking it looks good and then working out later on that it doesn't and having to change and take things apart again. This is a diagram just to explain lighting. So this is the concept here is obviously reduce your artificial lighting, use the sun. You don't need light. You don't need artificial lights the majority of the time. Use good design. Place windows in the right area. Here, this is saying obviously the most direct light and the strongest light is from above. Skylights are really important and they can be very useful, but obviously in the right place. If you're doing a new build design, which is obviously what I'm talking about now, design it right from the beginning and add those skylights in so that you can take advantage of it. Artificial lighting is obviously very negative in terms of your energy bills, but also it does actually produce quite a lot of heat in the rooms, which can have a negative and positive impact at the same time. Some really simple facts there about which specific industries actually are demanding that kind of that lighting, and those ones that could be improved quite significantly. Shops, obviously, 90% of them using artificial lighting. It's a shocking fact, really, but if they're designed properly from the beginning, they could cut costs hugely. A window design, again, looking back at that box house where we just put standard size windows in because it ticks a box. You can sell that quite quickly. You know, it meets the general demands of what people think they need. Whereas a window needs to be considered quite carefully. Here we're talking about a window generally should be 20% of the wall area, but only up to a room that's up to 7 meters deep. That generally, as a rule of thumb, meets the requirements you need to light that room. You don't need it any bigger. You don't need it any smaller. And it's quite a good one to remember. And obviously that changes here. Obviously, if the room becomes deeper, increase the. This one's a fact that I use quite a lot with customers myself. People always worry about extending out the back of their property. I want to go 7 meters, but I'm worried that my living room's going to be shaded now. How am I going to get light in there? And I always explain this fact to them, that if you've got a window 2 meters tall, you know that direct sunlight is going to get into that room by 4 meters. It's a really simple fact to remember, but it helps you design the building properly. And obviously, if you've got a 7 meter room, you then know, how can I combat that 3 meters at the back? Do I need light in that back? Do I need direct sunlight, or is it actually a room that can be dark and I'm happy with that? This is quite a clever technique as well in terms of new design, is having something called a light shaft, which was reflecting that higher level of light and bouncing into the room, rather than having just the direct window. Not used very often, and obviously it's something that can only be implemented in a new build design, but it is quite effective. And that comes into play with colours as well. Again, a simple thing that we all know a room that's painted white is going to feel really bright, and one that's painted a dark colour feels dark, but it influences the design of the windows, and that's what you've got to consider, these simple things all the time. And again, just talking about the roof lights, these are really effective. We all know how good they are when if you've seen an extension and they're used all the time. So landscaping again, I think you can be quite clever with this, and it's obviously got the other benefits of the environmental factor and in terms of habitats as well, which is really important nowadays. Trees and water are something that can be implemented into a new build design. One, they look really attractive, they provide habitats, but also they're really essential in terms of shading and cooling the building. You get a lot of benefit by having some kind of water element in front of your building, as the wind kind of picks up that change in that environment. It cools the air down, and as it enters your building, it's automatically and cheaply done. You're not paying for that benefit. It's just done using something environmental. Same thing I want to talk about. Hills are the same thing as well. So wind obviously really influences the performance of the building. Some of you may have seen an old timber frame Tudor building. When it's in the winter time, snow will drive through that. They'll find gaps. You'll have wind coming through. It's not enjoyable, but simple landscape changes at your home can deflect that. And again, can be used to improve the aesthetic of the building. And also, we mentioned earlier about the retail value in terms of people see these kind of landscape design features as an increase in their actual home value. Distances of the trees also affects the wind, so you need to be careful about where these landscape features are placed. This one just explains the height of the tree. If it's 5 times the height of the tree from the building, this can save 15-20% of your heating energy due to the cooling effect of the wind. It's causing the wind to change its pattern. It's drawing it into your building, which naturally ventilates the home. And this diagram just explains as you move those trees away, or you're building away from the landscape itself, how that affects the reduction in energy or its strength. I'll skip through these. We've discussed these quite a lot, actually, sorry. This is quite a simple fact as well. Talking about the pattern of how heat rises and how air rises, it's also good to consider position of your openings in your windows. We're always familiar with the classic casement window, but actually it's beneficial to have a bottom opener and a top opener because temperature changes in the room, and at different times of the day, it can be used for different benefits, drawing air in, but also releasing the air out of the building. So again, just looking back at the basics of design, are we considering the window design enough? Are we just looking at a cheap, simple casement window, or can we actually think, hang on, let's have 2 different openers to naturally ventilate the room rather than using, radiators to heat it later on because it's got too cold, or aircon because it's got too hot. This is another technique as well, which we're probably familiar with, is obviously using, they call it chimney vents or chimney windows. It's looking at how heat rises through the building, creating openings in the upper parts of the house to escape the air. Some things that just aren't implemented in the basic design, so it's just considering these simple facts and using that to your advantage. So it's looking at new technologies as well. So heat recovery systems, which I'm sure we've all heard about. Use that natural pattern of the air rising through the building, capture it, use that heat that's already been produced, bring it back into the building. It sounds really simple, and we've talked about it many, many times, but people aren't using it enough. And as a designer, I get asked all the time, how can I improve? These are things that we can do. The next thing is obviously looking at the actual build-up of the dwellings that we're looking at. Simple diagram talking about how a tent heats up. It's because it's lightweight. We need to look at what materials we're using and the density of those and how that can improve heat control. So heavyweight buildings heat up slowly, they cool down slowly, but they've got a high thermal mass. And thermal mass is basically, I like to think it's the density of the material itself. So this diagram talks about the insulation value versus the storage capacity. It's looking at a lightweight material compared to a dense material and how that varies. They're all different thicknesses, obviously. Like Ramda, for example, It's a really dense material, takes a long time to heat up, but that can store that heat quite for a longer time. Earthshout design is another one which we've used a few times. It's using the environment around you. This is what I repeat a little bit, but use the natural environment. What is the building? Where is the building situated? What can you use within that landscape and within that site that doesn't cost you anything, that can be a benefit in terms of the build cost, in terms of the future cost of the user, and also does it have environmental benefits for habitats and things like that. But Earthshout about buildings that work really well because you're just using natural materials from the site and recycling them essentially with a good aesthetic as well. And this diagram's looking at bringing all those kind of facts together in terms of material selection, the energy you're actually using to heat the building, and ventilation. So it's talking about that first slide where what are the basic requirements of a dwelling in terms of it being comfortable, and what do we need. And it's looking at how each of these different factors, when you bring that into a design, you eventually meet the perfect area of comfort in terms of considering all those factors that could affect the building. And this diagram is just looking at more specific to our regions, which is obviously a cold winter and a hot summer climate. And it brings all these basic design features that you can bring into a building that would naturally improve the sustainability of it. You're not relying on artificial heating, artificial lighting. It's using clever technologies, clever design, and the right placement of those, whilst considering the actual site itself. So what are the benefits of adding all these features and taking a bit more time in the design itself? I like to do it because obviously it's attractive and creative. It looks good, but that's not always the benefit. But it does also improve the value of the property itself. From my perspective, as a developer as well, we're doing these things at our cost sometimes. We're putting in technologies and features that aren't the cheapest. We could build basic square houses, but we're actively doing these features to improve it overall. And that's becoming our USP in the area. People are recognizing the fact that we're doing good design and good build quality and focusing on sustainability as well. It obviously reduces the carbon footprint of the building and eventually becomes self-sufficient by adding technology as well as basic design. Eventually, it improves the comfort of the users that live there, and that's ultimately the goal. We want to make sure that we're designing and building buildings that are comfortable to live in and cheaper throughout the duration. And it's becoming less reliant on harmful materials and building techniques. So I want to try and pull away from the basic build that we all are familiar with and try and change people's minds in terms of considering better techniques, better technologies and materials. And just to finish with, really, I want to see some change in how customers, myself as a user of materials, and developers and builders generally, how they perceive the build and the selection of materials from the beginning, and making it easier for us all to understand our impact by using the basic brick or changing that to be a timber-clad building, for example. And I relate that to the food industry when they brought in the traffic light system. which really helped people recognise their impact on their health, because they could see what these materials are made up of, what their impact was, and then we slowly began to recognise actually we should change, we should become more healthy, we should not pick up that particular chocolate bar, we should pick up another one because it might be slightly better. It'd be nice to see something similar, traffic light system, used in terms of materials. You know, I would like to go pick up an insulation panel and see this traffic light system and understand what is the carbon footprint. Can it be recyclable? Are there harmful chemicals using it? Is it better to use this other material choice? I think by simplifying the selection of materials, that's better for the customer, because ultimately they don't understand the materials like some of us do. And sometimes I don't either. That's it.
Ben, thanks ever so much. I'm going to plant some trees 5 times the distance from my house, and I'm going to claim I now know how to do architecture. So, yeah, really lovely run through. I think, you know, most of us live in the builder's merchant world where we're, or in the development world where we're buying the products and we're building the houses, and it's really nice to take that step back and look at, well, actually what goes into thinking about how do we design them intelligently and cleverly. So thank you for that. Thank you very much to James and Phil as well. Guys, I realise I'm holding you from the bar. Upstairs, as usual, are a selection of suppliers, so do go and talk to them, find out what they're up to, engage in this and enjoy. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you for coming. And, yeah, the bar is open.